our third speaker. A little bit more involved. She's mine. Brandy Macaluso. She is the coordinator of victim services specializing in victim and disabilities with the Coalition of Independent Living Options in West Palm Beach, Florida. She received her master's social worker from Florida Atlantic University in Boca Raton, summa cum laude. We were very proud. She has a focus on certification on elders and their families. Her community experience includes providing direct service to victims with disabilities that have acquired a disability through an act of violent crime or that have been exploited due to a disability. Brandy has conducted many focus groups with victims, assistance providers, and leaders in victim field to develop protocols and provided training. She has worked in the rehab. She's worked in IDEA. She is a past president who sits on the executive board of Human Trafficking Coalition of the Palm Beaches. She has written and participated in writing books that are used for social workers in the college level. She works with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement and Palm Beach State College criminal justice programs, and her books were two, and she has published 2 peer review articles that are related with disabilities. She received just this year, 2013, from Governor Scott, the Florida State Victim Advocate of the Year in 2013, and she's also been acknowledged as the Advocate of the Year for Palm Beach County. Please welcome Brandy.
Thank you. You know, it's so weird because I'm used to presenting to law enforcement, and they're usually a tough crowd. They usually fill in the back first, but then I was told that realtors are even tougher crowd, so take it easy on me. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the art of inclusion and selling properties to clients that have disabilities and some of the things that you might want to consider with that. So with that, we're going to talk a little bit about the disability types. When we talk about disability, what do you think of first? Do you think of a person that is using a wheelchair? Do you think of somebody who's using a cane like Christine? What do you think of when you talk about disability? So we cover pretty much all of the disability types, which are physical, mental, emotional, cognitive, developmental or intellectual, deaf and hard of hearing, blind, visual impairment, and then severe, hidden, or medical disabilities. So when we talk about disability, what is the definition, the actual statutory definition of a disability? Well, according to our Americans with Disabilities Act, the statutory definition is any person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity, or has a record of such impairment, or is regarded as having such impairment. Now, the Americans with Disabilities Act really is all-inclusive. When we talk about people who are have a record of having such impairment, we could be referring to people that have had a history of cancer, that the cancer is no longer a problem in their life right now, but they have a history of having a disability. It also includes people who are regarded as having a disability. That means that there's somebody that kind of looks peculiar or acts peculiar. They would be actually covered on the Americans with Disabilities Act as needing any type of reasonable accommodations. So when we look also at the Fair Housing Act definition, Fair Housing Act actually doesn't use the term disability. They use the term handicapped, which is a little outdated. But the definition are basically the same. So when we talk about handicapped, I just want to bring up the fact that words have power. Throughout the civil rights and human rights struggles that we've seen in the past, a lot of the negative terminology that was used, I mean, it's been used for any culture, any religion. Everybody has something that they've been called that they really didn't like, or that really was not comfortable for them. People with disabilities are no different than that. So we like to talk about people first language. You notice that I didn't call it the Disabled Americans Act. This is the Americans with Disabilities Act, okay? So when you're in the field and you're talking about somebody who has a disability, typically you want to refer to them as, this person has cerebral palsy. Like Christine. Christine has cerebral palsy. She is a woman with cerebral palsy. Okay, she's not a palsied woman. She's not a disabled woman. So we try and refer to people first language. A person who is blind, a person who is deaf, a person who has a physical disability. There are 3 exceptions to that rule. Can anybody guess what they are? 3 exceptions.
Visually impaired?
What's that?
Visually impaired?
Visually impaired? No. No. Okay. The 3 exceptions are, number 1, disabled veterans. Okay? Disabled veterans. They have fought long and hard to be regarded as disabled veterans. They are proud of the disabilities that they got in the field. So they are one of the exceptions, actually. The second exception is people who are deaf. When you talk about, this is deaf with a capital D, deaf culture. They actually believe that they have a specific language. Their language is usually American Sign Language here in the States, but that can vary depending on where they're from. Okay? So deaf people with deaf culture, because they have specific cultural norms that go along with being deaf. The third exception is how somebody refers to themselves. Okay? If somebody comes up and says, listen, I'm disabled, I have a wheelchair, I suffered a stroke, something like that, obviously you're not going to want to correct them how they're referring to themselves, so just keep that in mind. A lot of times with the older generations, they use words such as crippled, feeble-minded, deaf, mute, things like that, which are also kind of outdated at this point. So your initial client contact. Is your office set up to assist a person with a disability? Can you tell me anything that you would take into consideration for an initial client contact?
Can they get in the front door?
Can they get in the front door? Absolutely. What else?
Steps.
Steps, okay. Parking. Anything else?
Room for their wheelchair.
Room for a wheelchair?
And make sure that if your office is on the 2nd floor, you got elevators.
Elevators.
Bathrooms.
Bathrooms.
Just going to them.
Going to them, maybe? Sure. Okay. Here are some considerations. Does your office offer text telephoning, or do you, as an agent, text your clients? If you're trying to communicate with a client who is deaf, the majority of the deaf culture population text. So are you equipped to be able to text? Are you keeping up with the, times, so to speak? Email and scan documents. If you have somebody that you're working with who is blind or has a visual impairment and they have a document scanner, you have to be really careful about some of the images that you use or some of the lines and how those kind of add up. A lot of times scanned images on some of the scanners that they use will not pick up any writing that is over an image. So you have to keep that in mind. In person, what happens if somebody walks into your office and is deaf? Do you have what you need to assist them? Do you even know how to assist them? So that's some of the things that to keep in consideration. Also, transportation. When you talk about transportation, is your office located in a place that has easy access for transportation lines? Okay. So major elements of a real estate deal. You talk about your initial interview with the client, making any referrals that might be needed to any mortgage or lending, setting the appointments, scheduling showings, closings, things like that. Some of the things to keep in consideration also as far as setting some appointments and scheduling showings, I know that some realtors will do like a full day. They'll plan a full day, they'll map out their route on what properties they're going to show an individual. However, if the individual is using a wheelchair, how long can they sit? How long can they stand if they're using a cane? How much can they walk? So just keeping those things into consideration when you are doing your major elements. So some just basic disability etiquette. Extending the same courtesy as you would for anyone else, respecting personal privacy, personal space, treating adults as adults, speak to the person, not their companion. I know that this is a mistake with if somebody comes in with an interpreter. Sometimes the person will speak to the interpreter and not to the client. Anytime, even though the client is not particularly looking at you, they're looking at the interpreter to interpret, it is courtesy to look at them directly when you're speaking, when you're asking questions, and when you're talking. Okay? Relax and use common expressions. One of my mentors, who is actually on our board, she is blind. And, I'll see her and be like, oh man, Sharon, did you see that movie? It was crazy. And she will be like, no, I didn't see that yet. She does go to the movies. She does go to the movies. She waits until the string, at the end when a lot of people aren't going to be going to the movies, when it's just about on this last week of being shown in theaters. And her husband actually sits next to her and visually describes everything for her. So she goes to the movies, things that you wouldn't necessarily think of would happen. Also talking to somebody who's in a wheelchair and asking them, do you want to go for a walk in the park? Oops, you just relax and be natural. Are you planning events? Plan ahead. On your resources that I handed out to you on the sheet, there is an excellent resource for if you are planning an event. Some things to take into consideration when you are planning, such as, how many accessible rooms does the place have? If you're doing a large conference like we're here at today, how far are the accessible rooms from the actual convention area? Which, there's people in heels that I see that are walking from the hotel that are just dying by the time they get here. So taking that type of thing into consideration. When you have a hearing disability, some of the communication issues, it's appropriate to tap them on the shoulder, wave your hand, look at the person, speak clearly. Sometimes they will be lip readers. I know people who don't have a hearing disability but have a processing disability that have to read your lips in order to process what you're saying. Just make sure that you're facing a light source, that your hands are away from your face. Sometimes you want to talk like this, or you have an itch, or and it's hard for them to be able to see that. And when appropriate, using writing notes. If you don't have an interpreter, if a person just stops in and they're not prepared, or you're not prepared, writing notes would be appropriate until you get an interpreter on hand. Vision impairment. Always identify yourself. When you're in a group, say your name as you're speaking to give a vocal cue to let the person that is blind know that you're speaking and that who it is. Speak in a normal tone of voice. I can't tell you how many times I'll be sitting with Sharon and somebody will walk up to her and be screaming in her face because they think that she has a disability. Her disability is not hearing, it's that she's blind, and you can just speak normally. And indicate when you move, which is something that I am really terrible at. Sometimes I will just get up and be over here and I see Sharon kind of reach for me and where did you go? So that's, there's stuff that we all have that we just don't think about. It's not a second thought. That could be a little detrimental. To assist, offer your arm. Do not take theirs when you're dealing with somebody who has a vision impairment or who is blind. And when giving directions, you have to be very specific. Are there stairs? When you look at a clock, you can guide them with a clock. Is it, left 50 feet? Is it at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock? Those types of things. Okay, communicating with a wheelchair. Wheelchairs, you have to see them as an extension of that person. Okay? You don't want to lean or hang on a person because that's like you're leaning or hanging on somebody's arm. It's very uncomfortable for them. Speak to the person, not their companion. And it is appropriate that you can get down on your knees when you talk to them and kind of crouch down so that you're eye level and they're not breaking their neck trying to look at you. So these are just common courtesy things that we deal with that you might not even think about again when you're talking to somebody with a disability. And then giving directions again, considering distance, obstacles. Here we have sunny 1 minute, rainy the next down in Florida. So just keeping in consideration with some of the weather that we have here. We know during the summer typically it's afternoon thunderstorms, so you don't want to have somebody that's using transportation lines coming in the afternoon when it's storming. So keeping things in perspective. If somebody has difficulty speaking, giving whole unhurried attention, encouraging, you don't want to correct them. Be patient, don't finish their sentences. Just common courtesy. And you want to ask questions that have short answers. because there's nothing worse. It's not taking you a whole lot of